Hi, welcome. Sorry, we're just greeting each other, doing our nice little turnover. My name's Amanda Morgan. I am the co-chair for Metaverse Standards Forum 3D Assets Working Group. We've had a little bit of evolution in MSF recently, so 3D Assets is in the state of evolving, but this is really kind of a remnant of our former interoperability of GLTF and USD, and this is really that activity feed from that. So we have some great speakers for you today to look at the GLTF side, to look at USD side, and kind of where we are, what we're doing right now as activities in MSF, and where we're going. So I don't want to delay. We only have an hour here, so just a couple things to note. We are recording this, and the slides will be online at Kronos Events by tomorrow, I think. So please feel free to take pictures if you want, but know that that everything will be accessible. Also, we have some great other BOFs going on, so please feel free to join the Kronos BOFs as well. Obviously, Kronos and MSF are closely tied and related. So without further ado, our first speaker is going to be Ken Jakubzak from Meta, and talking to us about the GLTF side of character and avatar extensions. Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, Amanda. So today I'd like to talk to you all about the character and avatar extensions that we've been working on for the last year and a half in Kronos. We've been collaborating pretty closely with VRM, but prior to that I should introduce myself. I work at Meta. I am an engineer there. I've been focused on presence options between Meta and Microsoft for the last 6-8 years. And it felt like it was time to actually have standards that could be reusable in a format that I particularly enjoy, GLTF. So I want to talk about this collaboration that we've had with VRM for a moment. It started back in October 2024, and since then we've been collaborating together. It wasn't an official TSG until last year in October. We formalized it as a TSG, and I actually became the chair of the Character and Avatar TSG. We call it CATS. The G is silent. And since then, we've actually continued, and we are at the point where we have some sample implementations and tools that I'd like to show you all a little snippet of. And we're going to bring it to the 3D Formats Working Group to bring it to the next stage, hopefully soon. So we're collaborating with VRM. They have their own standard, which is a wrapper around GLTF. And so figuring out how we can balance their particular needs for their avatars, and then generalization has been something that we have been working with them pretty closely on, and trying to make sure that we do not block them from their current implementations, their SDKs. We don't make it painful for them, but at the same time we need to start small and then go wider as time goes on. So we're currently in the phase 1 set of extensions. I will have a link in a bit for you all to take a look at the PR if you want. I'd love for you to provide feedback, comments, hate mail, anything. We want you to participate and to provide us the feedback that we need to make sure that once we bring it to the 3D Format Working Group, it's in a good state. But that's not where we're going to end. We're not going to say, here's the first set of extensions, we're good to go. We have a lot of other things that we're going to have on the pipe, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment as well. Well, 10 minutes, you'll see. Let's talk about the philosophy behind it, though. Instead of a single monolithic extension, we want to make sure that this is a set of building blocks that you can create a sort of self-describing character and avatar with. Hopefully, through that composition, you'll be able to understand, when loaded, okay, I see it has these particular attributes, this is how it drives expressions, and this is its current skeleton, and it actually has some form of mapping for other industry skeletons in it as well. And this is because everyone has an opinion on characters. There's no one universally held way of describing and powering a character. There are as many different variations as there are stars in the sky, and I'm reminded about it every day. So we want this to be flexible. We don't want to ratify what we know is going to be something that is a controversial thing. Like, for example, off the bat, skeletal vocabulary, not top of mind, because that's something that people will go to war over. Instead, we will ratify what we know isn't going to change, and we aren't going to prevent the opinionated use of properties or like studio or engine definitions. As part of this, we've been working with the Metaverse Standards Forum in general. Like I participate in the Metaverse Standards Forum, and I've been going to AOUSD, for example, and there's a slide on that in a bit. But the reason why we've been doing this is because there is a balance that needs to happen between having rigid structure and flexibility. So to foster wider adoption of this set of extensions, we would really want to prioritize that flexibility. At the same time, achieving interoperability, like, you have to standardize something, right? You can't just say like, well, throw anything in there. So we are really balancing this tightrope, and we would love your feedback on how well we are or how badly we are balancing this tightrope. So beyond just these extensions and these sample implementations, we'll be working with the Metaverse Standards Forum and helping them and contributing to their efforts across like translation frameworks, as well as figuring out how longer term we can have standardization for common character and avatar concepts, which lies above, I think, formats like USD and GLTF, and that is likely a good place for us to start talking about that. Here are some of the top level ones that we view. Like, we know that this is not an easy thing, but we think that with time and with industry participation, we can get there. I could go through these. I think that you all probably have encountered these at one point if you've worked in the character space. So I'm not going to go into deep detail, but I will say this is just like a snippet of what long-term we think that we need to address and start to work with folks like AOUSD and the Metaverse Standards Forum on. So again, this feels a little redundant as a slide now that I'm actually saying it out loud and presenting it. In my mind, when I did this, I thought, of course we're going to talk about how we're working with the AOUSD and the Metaverse Standards Forum. But I've said that about 3 times. So we will say that, yes, we're participating in the AOUSD Character Interest Group. We have a liaison. I go to those meetings to make sure that we provide our perspective and we make sure that we try to come to an interoperable future as much as possible, where like what they're implementing where it makes sense for GLTF as a last mile transmission format is something that we can eventually translate into. And again, we're working with the Metaverse Standards Forum, so I'm just going to skip ahead. So example implementations. We have 3 examples for you today. Technically, the last 2 are actually tied together. So if you want to bring up your cameras, you can go ahead and look at these. We have our Three.js testbed, we have our Unity testbed, and our Unity GLTF plugin branch. So these are runtime implementations as well as an intended set of shared libraries. The Three.js-based implementation was done by Observerson from the VRM consortium, our partners, and it's a great example. It also has a converter. So if you want to take a VRM character that you've already established or you have, you can throw it into the converter and it'll become a KHR character instance that you then can use throughout the rest of the test beds, and I recommend you take a look. It's really great. It's also a very good sample implementation, so if you want to reference it, feel free. The first step for us is going to be Three.js and Unity/C# because it just seemed like a very approachable way to start to explore the extensions and make sure that we're doing the right thing. And Three.js in particular, I think is quite important for VRM and the VRM consortium, so it made sense to start there. Caveat before I switch slides, these are prone to change in the next few months as we move towards release candidate status. Like right now we're in draft review or status, I believe. Like we're effectively in a point where we are going to go to them and say, we think that this is good enough to go on to the next stage and start to have more scrutiny from the wider group. So it might change quite a bit. Hopefully it won't. We think it's in a good state, but just a heads up. So let's talk about the base extension. You're probably wondering, Ken, why did it just flash and why did the same character appear? We have very limited test assets, and so technically those are different characters. And this orb is another cursed one that's made through a synthetic pipeline. But these are all KHR characters. whether it's a VRM character that's been converted or a faceless amorphous blob. This KHR character extension represents a mandatory root level metadata extension that says this is a character. So it enables runtime discovery, which we think is important, particularly because at least over our years of experience, we've encountered that differentiating between models and their intended use has not always been clear from the get-go when you load it into Engine or DCC. So having something that says this is a character seemed like a baseline need. And expression seemed like a very baseline need from like a VRM perspective. How do you drive expressions? This is an example of the Unity implementation driving the set of expressions that we have through our character expression extensions. So in this case, we have a base KHR character expression extension that then has a bunch of derivative extensions, one for each different type of expression type, actually. So you have morph targets, joints, and textures. The reason why these are separate is because we don't know what we don't know. And so we think that, like, in the future, if there are different types of ways to power expressions, we want to remain flexible but have a common basis. So this uses KHR animation pointer and the KHR, or just general GLTF animation base as the basis, and then we effectively create these different expression types using that system. We also have a way to provide expression masking. So if there are different expressions that may conflict, you can say, well, this actually overrides others when it's activated in this particular way. And we also have expression mapping. We know, again, that like people do not share necessarily the way that they label expressions. This is something that you'll see in a different context in skeletons, but let's just say that you have like the AR kit version, and you know that it actually maps to your personal implementation or like your studio's implementation in this way. So you're able to then say, hey, this is my set of expressions, and here's how it maps to this particular standard vocabulary for this particular target runtime or engine. And you can then read that and then go ahead and interpret it. So you can actually use it in that context. Similarly, we have it for skeletons. So we know that this is just the beginning. Skeleton mapping is one step of a large series of steps. However, that first step then allows for folks like VRM, who has their own definition of a skeleton, to leverage it in other infrastructures if needed, as well as other runtimes. Again, very baby steps here, but we hope to continue to make it so that like proper retargeting is something that is more easily defined in this context. To that extent, we also have a reference pose extension, just to make it so that, like, hey, if you have a pose-based pipeline or a tool set or runtime where you needed to be in a pose for some reason at the beginning, you're able to define that as additional data within the GLTF model. So you can say a pose, t pose, and then you can define a custom one for your particular use case or your pipeline. Let's talk about some more generalized node extensions and a mesh primitive extension. Lookats are probably primarily used across the board in a lot of runtimes, but defining them and saying, hey, in this particular hierarchy in GLTF, in my scene, this is a lookat. There's no standardized way to do this. This is kind of like something that like a runtime might derive or it might just generate. But I've also seen instances where this is actually defined in the skeleton. So saying, hey, this is a lookat is something that we've added. We've also additionally added things like camera hints. If you have a first person or third person perspective, you might want to have different cameras for those versions of your model or for those variations of your model. And so you can basically say, this is a camera at this position for first person or for my custom label. And you can take it or leave it. These are basically hints to say, these are various viewpoints that you can then leverage a camera in for the use of your runtime. And if you want to use it, great. But more often than not, you might use it and then modify it and adjust it. That's why it's a hint. It's not a mandate. Similarly, we have visibility hints so that if you have a model that is not just a completely different model for first and third person, you can say, hey, this node is actually not visible in first person, or this one is only visible in third person. We also want to allow for custom labels in this as well. We additionally have it for mesh primitives, which is something that is like just a organizational thing at this point. So if you have a mesh with multiple primitives, you're able to say this particular primitive is invisible. We have guidance on this for Unity, which is likely just through a material invisible shader. So, but I've already blabbed enough. I am running out of time. Sorry, folks. I like to ramble. We have next focus areas. GLTF does not have a good way to define animation and animation metadata. We are trying to work on that. We are going to be working with folks like in the Gaussian workstream, well, not the Gaussian workstream, the 3D volumetric media workstream. On that, we also want to work on secondary animation and physics, metadata, and runtime standards. And we also want to focus on things like material and rendering. This was an asset flow. I'm going to wrap it up because I see Amanda looking at me with concern. We view this as part of a wider spectrum. USD or other file formats are needed as GLTF is really the last mile transmission format. So thank you. Thank you for listening to me ramble. I hope you learned something. I hope you were able to pull the test beds. And if not, hey, comment on the PR. Tell us we're wrong. Tell us we're right. You can join Kronos or join the 3DF meetings, or also join the Metaverse Standard 4 meeting.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken. Yes, all the things Ken just said. Join us in Kronos, join us at MSF. We can't do this without the feedback. This is supposed to be an open standard, an open community. Not that we're building standards in MSF, but we're here to coordinate all these standards together. So that being said, we've looked at the characters and avatars perspective from the GLTF perspective. And now we're going to turn it over to Nick Burkard from Meta, who's going to talk about it from an AOUSD perspective. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Amanda. Hi, everybody. I'm Nick Burkard. I'm also at Meta, just like Ken. I work with Ken. But I am the chairman of the Characters Motion Interactivity Interest Group in AOUSD. And so this is an interest group that is very new. And it is our big thing is that we're interested in enriching the definition and the representation of characters in OpenUSD. We have a lot of industry partners that have come to the table since this has been a discussion since last SIGGRAPH and kind of came into the world earlier this year. But our domains cross film, games, and robotics, and we're all very interested in how do we get a common ground, common understanding of expressing whether it's characters, robots, things that are articulating, and anything that hangs off of that has motion, drives motion inside of USD. Because right now, our options are pretty limited to USD scale, and so, our goals initially are, to increase the interoperability of characters across DCCs, through game engines, through different applications, and share these common components across these different domains. Like I said, the existing technology right now is kind of like USD scale, and OpenExec is starting to grow in its maturity in USD. And just yesterday, Pixar announced that they were going to be sharing some of their rigging schemas in fall. So that's going to be a really exciting moment for this interest group as we kind of start seeing some schemas, come out of Pixar. And we're hoping that our output initially, which is going to be like a state of the industry survey, will help inform, when those schemas come out, what is everybody doing? How is everybody across these different domains expressing characters, building characters, whether it's in Maya, Blender, Isaac Sim? How are these things being articulated, and what are the common intersection points? And from there, we're hoping that these documents spin out some working groups so that we can start formalizing some standards inside of USD. So again, I don't have videos like Kent does, but maybe next year we'll see. We'll see maybe a document. and then maybe some videos. I don't know. No commitments, but that's kind of where we're at right now. Again, we're a very young, group. Ken comes to the AOUS, the interest group, and I go to the avatars and avatars extension group as well. And so we're also very kind of collaborative in that sense. So whatever we're doing inside of AOUSD, we want to make sure that it ladders into what they're doing in GLTF and Kronos. And from there, I'll hand it over to Henrik. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks so much, Nick. Yeah, and that's the thing. I didn't really introduce, what is MSF. If you're not aware, the Metaverse Standards Forum, we really do take the inputs from all the different SDOs to make sure that we have interoperability across. We look for those pain points when you're going from, say, GLTF to USD. How do we break down those barriers? How do we integrate? How do we get on the front end of this before we have these characters and avatars extensions to make sure we're interoperable before we even get to ratification? So the work in these working groups is so vital if you have an interest, especially in characters and avatars. We're in the early stages here of ratifying these new Kronos extensions, of building the USD applications and implementations. Now's the time to get involved so that we can have interoperability across the board. And whether that's in Kronos, whether that's in USD, whether that's in MSF, we look for your participation. So moving forward, another aspect of 3D assets isn't just GLTF and USD, but that's really what our focus is today in this BOF. So I'm going to turn it over to Henrik Edstrom, who is with Cesium, part of Bentley Systems, to really talk about a kind of a broader look on where we are in MSF. Thanks.
Thanks, Amanda. I think you covered most of my first slide here already, but so I'll take a step back and look more broadly. We heard a lot of specifics around characters and avatars, but I'll talk in more general terms around some of these 3D assets formats. So like Amanda just mentioned, the forum is really a place where we can bring these different communities together to have discussions on how all these formats relate to each other and how we want them to develop going forward to best support the ecosystem. So avoiding kind of unnecessary duplication, having multiple standards trying to do the exact same thing. And obviously, in some instances, you need to interop between the different formats. So we want to have that interoperability be as smooth and frictionless as possible. Yes, we already heard obviously about Kronos driving GLTF and AUUSD driving the standardization for OpenUSD, and then we have other relevant standards and projects like MaterialX and OpenPBR being under the Academy Software Foundation. So we're bringing representatives from all these communities together in the Metaverse Standards Forum to discuss the evolution of these standards. So I've shown this slide many times before, but I think it's still important to understand where these different formats are coming from. And you have authoring workflows where you're dealing with like kind of the source of truth data is completely lossless, everything is editable. You want to have really good cross-tool and cross-vendor workflows where you can edit and modify your assets with no data loss. So these formats need to be very flexible and very expressive. On the other side, you have delivery or last mile formats like GLTF, which is more of a derived version where you strip away unnecessary data. You don't necessarily preserve like the design intent and all the operations that leads to the final version of an asset. And so you want to optimize for transmission and portability and ease of integration. So there is a reason why we have multiple formats, and they've kind of focused on different aspects to optimize for different workflows. So if you want to know more about the main formats, OpenUSD and GLTF, of course, but also FBX and OpenJ and Colorado and others, Nick Brusino has compiled an excellent document here with lots of more details, so I can highly recommend that one. with a lot of input from other folks, but big thanks to Nick, who has been driving this initiative for the last few years here. So first, let's just recap some of the developments on the GLTF side. I think the main one last year has been the work we're putting into GLTF 2.1. If you were here last year, you heard about GLX and GLFX, and there was a lot of discussions on maybe adding a different file extension to primarily support complex scenes and external references. But all of that work is now put into GLTF 2.1. So the main feature is, again, external references and being able to composite the scene from multiple different assets. So when we talk about scene composition here, it's very different from what you see in OpenUSD, where you have a very sophisticated composition arcs and layering and all that. So that's not what GLTF is trying to do here. And there are also other interesting features like implicit shapes, bounding volume hierarchies, and so on. We don't have time to cover that in detail here, but there is a BOF tomorrow. So if you want to know more, I can highly recommend that one. We also have a blog post that is pretty detailed on kind of going through all the main features here, GLTF 2.1. But this is work in progress. One thing I want to mention is that a lot of the features that are now going into GLTF 2.1, they have been part of 3D tiles for a while. So external references, bounding volume hierarchies, and so on. So we're kind of rebasing 3D tiles to be built on this new version of GLTF 2.1. So as some of these features are getting broader adoption, different industries, and applicable to industries outside of geospatial, where 3D tiles has been most prevalent. We want to move those features into GLTF so it can be used by a much broader audience. Again, this is early work, but there's at least one pretty good implementation. We can call it the preview implementation from Martin Carl and NVIDIA. So if you want to get started with some of these extensions, you can check out this repo here. But again, this is work in progress, but to my knowledge, this is one of the earliest implementations of some of these 2.1 features. So over to OpenUSD, I mean, there's been a lot of developments in the last year, but I think the main one to call out is the version 1.0 of the core specification that was published in December. There is work towards 1.0 version of things outside the core, so materials, physics, geometries, and so on. And I think the target is to get that out before the end of the year. There's also a core specification 1.1 in the works that is likely going to be the one that is going to ISO. So a lot of interesting work there on OpenUSD. We also had the 2608 release released the other day. And some interesting features there is the level of detail schema and USD profiles. So both of those are highly interesting when it comes to interoperability, and something that we should probably work very closely between GLTF and USD to make sure that those things interop as well as possible. If you were here for the session we had just before, we talked a lot about Gaussian splats and the standardization there. So that was also work that happened to a large extent over the last year. We do have a release candidate for KHR Gaussian splatting in GLTF, and there's also schemas for Gaussian splats in OpenUSD that came in the 2603 release. So you guys can QR codes there if you want to know more, but there's a lot of work, and there was a lot of collaboration between these two communities to make sure that Gaussian splats were somewhat consistently represented between these two standards. Another aspect of interop between USD and GLTF that is of high importance is the vertex attributes. Again, Nick Borshino did a lot of the work here together with Felix Herbst, kind of documenting how vertex attributes work in OpenUSD, GLTF, and also FBX. FBX is not an open standard. It doesn't see a lot of investment these days, but it's very well established and supported by DCCs and content creation tools. So it's something to consider if you have a lot of assets in FBX already. So that's a great document that I can recommend if you're dealing with interoperability between these formats. Again, we had a longer talk at the Burkard Fellow last year on PBR material interoperability, so I won't cover that in a whole lot of detail, but obviously when it comes to interoperability and then making sure that assets look consistent between these formats, materials is absolute essence. So there is ongoing work on increasing the alignment between OpenPBR and GLTF PBR. So in the USD space and ecosystem, there is more and more alignment on using Material X as the container for materials, and then of course Material X can support any PBR model, but OpenPBR is probably the recommended one that will give you the most portability, both between DCC tools and also being consistently rendered in all kinds of renderers. So we want to make sure that we can convert OpenPBR to GLTF PBR for these kind of last mile workflows. So there is work on kind of reworking some of the GLTF extensions, especially around transmission and volumes, to make sure it's more compatible with OpenPBR. So a lot of collaboration happening there as well. Last but not least, I want to mention the USD file format plugins from Adobe. Paul here in the front has been leading that effort. This allows you to bring in 7 different file formats, including GLTF, into a USD stage. And there was just a new release that kind of rebases everything around OpenPBR to improve the material translation between the different formats. So all of that is open source. And if you're dealing with interoperability between these file formats, that's a great starting point, and especially with all the work that's been going into the material consistency. So like I mentioned, all previous speakers, please come join us. We have the A3 Asset Working Group, and if you have requirements or interests or contributions, we're very interested to hear from you. So please contact us if you want to get more involved. I think that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Henrik. All right, so before we open the floor to questions, I just want to just say it again that there are a lot of additional BOFs happening, mostly Kronos BOFs, but obviously the work we do between Kronos and MSF is very tightly coupled. So I just want to highlight that if you are interested in any other BOFs, there's also some stickers up here if you're interested in those. Please come join us. But let's open the floor to some questions. What questions do you have for our speakers?
Hello, I'm not an expert, but I was just really curious, with the big VTube application of a lot of these 3D character and expressibility tools, since the anime style is very 2D based, are there efforts to try to take that big database of 2D character and make it compatible with all the 3D assets? Both of you, really.
So one of the things that when working with VRM we wanted to address was particularly the toon style that most of their characters are styled after. All of their software to create VRM, not that every VRM is toon style, most of it's focused on that. So as part of that, we opened up conversations with other TSGs around supporting toon materials to make sure that it can support that aesthetic. It's not immediately on our roadmap because we have limited resources. So if anyone in the room is interested in joining and helping drive that across the line, we would love that. If you have that particular skill set, we would love to work with you. Nick, I'll let you.
Yeah, I think on the AOUSD side, I think from being in the Kronos meetings and being involved with VRM, it's very clear that that's a strong desire to be able to express and represent that. On the AOUSD side, it would be wonderful to get a group who is interested in that to be involved. I think we have a strong group of industry, I guess a collection of industry people, but like maybe not from that perspective, that particular point of view, who can express the needs for those types of characters, because they are different needs and different components that would need to be expressed. So if you're interested in operations at AOUSD, or reach out to me.
Thank you. Next question right here.
Shahram Kandahari, USC. Thank you for the nice presentation. I was wondering, does your standardization extend to 3D printing and the physical AI? Things like the texture, the components, how to print, how to assemble,
So
what it does when you interact with it, things like that.
So I can talk a little bit about physical AI, because certainly NVIDIA is very interested in robotics and physical AI and expressing that in USD, and threading that throughout what we're doing, standardizing it in USD. As far as the other aspects of 3D printing, I'm not sure. So I don't think we also have a strong presence of a group that is 3D printing focused yet. So if that's you and you're very interested in that, I think there are a number of groups you could probably join in AOUSD, not just the character group, but if you're interested in very particularly in 3D printing characters, then our group's probably the group for you.
Other questions? Well, I have a question for you as the audience. What is your biggest pain point right now between, maybe it's USD and GLTF, maybe it's other standards formats of 3D assets? What are you wrestling with right now in your workflows, in your use cases? What pain points are you seeing? Everything's solved. We fixed it all?
I worked at a AI real estate company for half a year, and then we were trying to do depth mapping from 2D, and we used a lot of physical tools, but mainly it was PLY and OBJ files, and those really had a difficult conversion that allowed us to get the points that we can actually apply Open 3D plane detection on. So that's a big solve for us.
Damn.
Thank you, Amanda. So coming from the geospatial side of things, one of the growing pain for us has been bringing native geospatial encoding or reference to assets like USD and GLTF. So through the work that we're doing through 3D tiles, some of it is being achieved, and USD is also pioneering bringing native location awareness into the asset, so that when it is being used in geospatial context, that it becomes native participant, right, without it having to go through addition, the transformation. So if the Metaverse Standards Forum, Kronos, and others could really promote those use cases, make it native, spatial. Well, geospatial is not anymore spatial, right? It's ubiquitous. It's all over around us. So the effort that you were spearheading and others was really great, and I wish to see that more continued in different forms.
Thanks, Tam. Yeah, and I'll just say, obviously, I work at Cesium. Our background has been more geospatial, but we keep finding, and one of the key aspects of MSF is that these lines are not, we're not stovepiped anymore. It's not just a geospatial solution, it's a solution. And it's one of the reasons why, Henrik mentioned 3D tiles and baselining that all into GLTF is because we found all these applications in 3D tiles for e-commerce and all these other aspects where there were more people who wanted it than the geospatial community, but people looked at it and said, well, that's a geospatial solution. And I think MSF solves or addresses some of those issues of previously stovepipe open geospatial consortium standard. Now we look at it in MSF as a more holistic perspective and say, well, how can this standard solve a problem, or how can we make sure we're interoperable between these standards organizations and have solutions that work across the board. So thanks, Tim. I didn't ask him to say that, by the way. Right back here.
Sorry, it might not be like character related, but this is the first session I could make for like the open standards. So I come more from digital humanities and IIIF standards, and we worked a lot with digitization. So now we're looking into more accessible pipelines for digitization for digital humanities professionals that can use their phones to reconstruct and make these assets available for historians and other researchers that are trying to look into different types of objects that are archived. So we're looking into building tools for using IIIF, which is mostly specified for images and tiled images, and how we can use that for 3D reconstruction objects. So I'm not really sure it relates to rigging our characters, but maybe we could rig a medieval armor or something.
It is absolutely applicable. We have had participants from I3F before in MSF. We ask, for more. These are the solutions. We're here for MSF to be able to assist in easing those pain points and also education, right? Maybe it's not a characters and avatars solution, but maybe it is something that USD already has, and we can say, oh, wait, that standard already exists. What does that look like for your application or your use case? And help organizations, different SDOs come together and really work together well. We don't develop standards in MSF, but we really try to just bring these organizations together. So it's a great use case, and one that we are driven by use cases and trying to alleviate pain points for those use cases. So it's a great application, and one we'd love for you to join us, and we can help maybe work through that pain point with you. Yes, right here.
Leveraging off that and the 3D printing, there's a lot of crossover going on. That's what's interesting about this group. I think raising awareness outside of the original user communities that formed this up is important because, IIIF, there's very advanced metadata that could flow right in and not have to be reinvented. So there's a power in bringing people together. And that's probably our biggest pain point now. And it's encouraging to see the direction, but I think when you go home, it'd be nice to say, because we've been trying to do the same with IIIF from the Met Museum. So it's like how to sort of bring this together is a secondary problem outside of the engineering, which is really cool. But when I go home, like people just want to see how can I make it work? So, yeah.
Join us.
Thanks, and thanks for the great presentation, everybody. This is the 5th or 6th CTA to join and contribute and so forth. And, I spent the last decade in various companies that were members of either Kronos and the MSF or AOUSD. And the collaboration is really, really impressive and productive at that level. And now as an individual contributor, it's beginning to dawn on me that I'm not sure any of these invitations are for individuals. And I'd love to hear some clarity around, like, when you say join us, is this for new companies to become members, or are there any pathways for individual contributors to become part of the conversation?
We're going to let Neil answer that question.
And by the way, this is for Kronos, MSF, and AOUSD.
Yeah. So I can't speak to AOUSD. Someone from AOUSD might want to speak to that. But Kronos is an SDO, so and we have significant costs and stuff. So the normal membership for Kronos is going to remain companies, but we do have individual contributors. If you can contribute, in a genuine way to standardization, please approach us, and we'd be happy to consider individual contributorship. The Metaverse Standards Forum is different, and I've become convinced that we should change, because currently Metaverse Standards Forum is for companies too. And 4 years ago when we set up the forum, that was so we didn't become randomized. But I think I've had contact from many people that are now individual contributors, and they want to participate. I'm going to propose to the board that we actually open it up to genuine individuals. I don't think we're going to become randomized. I think we should change. So hopefully in the next couple of months we'll have that change done. Does anyone want to talk from AUUSD? I imagine AUUSD is corporate members like Kronos, I imagine, but yeah, I can't speak to that.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, when I say join us, I still mean individual contributors join us, and maybe that's as an individual contributor at Kronos, maybe that's joining us, in the future of MSF, maybe that's just contributing on an extension that you're interested in on GitHub. Feedback is very coveted, so yeah. Anyone else? Questions? What are your pain points, use cases? SDOs, we have, MSF has MOUs with multiple SDOs, and that's how we work across the different standards development organizations, so yes. Great, well, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it. I appreciate our speakers today, and look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.